If you judge someone before learning who they are, the mistake belongs to you, not them. The words had barely left the elderly receptionist's mouth before the chief executive officer shook his head with visible impatience. Security. Daniel Whitmore called across the polished marble lobby, his voice calm but firm enough to silence every nearby conversation. Please escort that woman out of my building. Every pair of eyes turned toward the entrance. Standing just inside the revolving glass doors was a black woman dressed in a neatly pressed navy blazer, dark slacks, and sensible leather shoes that had clearly been polished with care but worn through years of use. She carried an aged brown leather briefcase with both hands, standing perfectly still beneath the towering glass ceiling as morning sunlight poured through the windows and scattered across the marble floor. The lobby of Whitmore Global Holdings was famous throughout downtown Chicago for its elegance. A massive chandelier reflected against polished stone walls while quiet instrumental music floated through hidden speakers. Executives crossed the lobby with expensive coffee cups in hand. Assistants hurried toward elevators holding digital tablets, and visitors admired the enormous company logo suspended behind the reception desk. Yet within seconds, every movement slowed. Two security officers exchanged uncertain glances before beginning to walk toward the woman. Neither appeared eager to confront someone who had done nothing more than quietly wait near the reception desk. Daniel adjusted the cuff of his tailored charcoal suit and glanced toward his executive assistant. "Do not let her disrupt today's board meeting," he said. "We have investors arriving within the hour." The assistant nodded, although her eyes briefly drifted back toward the woman, who remained remarkably composed. She was neither arguing nor attempting to leave. She simply stood with relaxed shoulders, her calm expression almost impossible to read. One security officer finally stopped a respectful distance away. "Ma'am," he said politely, "our chief executive officer has asked us to escort you outside." The woman looked at him with warm, steady eyes before offering a gentle smile. "Have I broken any rules?" she asked softly. The officer hesitated. "No, ma'am." "Have I disturbed anyone?" she continued. He looked around the silent lobby before quietly answering, "No, ma'am." She nodded once. "Then I will wait." Her voice never rose above ordinary conversation, yet somehow it carried farther than the chief executive officer's command had only moments earlier. Employees standing near the elevators stopped pretending not to watch. A young receptionist slowly lowered her phone. Even the barista inside the company coffee kiosk leaned forward to see what would happen next. Daniel walked several steps closer, maintaining the confident posture that had helped him build one of the fastest-growing financial technology companies in the country. "This is private property," he said evenly. "If you do not have scheduled business here, you need to leave." The woman met his gaze without the slightest hint of anger. "I do have business here." Daniel folded his arms. "With whom?" She glanced briefly toward the executive elevators at the far end of the lobby before answering. "They know I am coming." Daniel gave a short, skeptical smile. "I assure you, I know every important meeting taking place in this building today." The woman simply adjusted her grip on the worn leather briefcase. Sometimes important meetings are larger than one person. Before Daniel could respond, the quiet hum of the executive elevator changed. A soft electronic tone echoed through the marble lobby as the private elevator doors began sliding open several floors above, unseen by those gathered below, while somewhere inside the building hurried footsteps suddenly broke the careful silence of an ordinary business morning. Exactly 30 minutes earlier, the morning had begun with nothing more dramatic than a cool breeze flowing between the skyscrapers of downtown Chicago. The sidewalks around Whitmore Global Holdings filled with office workers carrying coffee cups, briefcases, and laptops while yellow taxis rolled steadily through the intersections beneath the rising sun. Among the stream of professionals walking toward the financial district was a black woman whose quiet confidence attracted almost no attention. Amara Brooks walked at an unhurried pace, holding a weathered brown leather briefcase that had clearly accompanied her through countless business meetings over the years. Her navy blazer was tailored but modest, her white blouse neatly pressed, and her comfortable leather shoes reflected practicality rather than luxury. Nothing about her appearance suggested someone eager to impress strangers. Instead, she carried herself with the calm assurance of a person who no longer measured success by appearances. She paused briefly outside the towering glass headquarters of Whitmore Global Holdings, looking up at the company's silver logo shining against the morning light. For several silent seconds, she simply observed employees entering through the revolving doors, greeting one another with practiced smiles before disappearing into the lobby. A faint smile crossed her face, not from excitement, but from memory. Nearly 8 years earlier, she had quietly believed in a struggling technology company when almost nobody else had. She remembered reading financial reports late into the night, studying leadership decisions, and seeing potential where most investors had only seen uncertainty. That decision had never been about headlines or recognition. It had been about faith in people willing to build something meaningful. She stepped inside the building without hesitation. The cool air of the marble lobby replaced the warmth of the summer morning as soft piano music drifted from hidden speakers. Fresh flowers decorated the reception desk, their fragrance blending with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee from the lobby cafe. Employees hurried toward elevators while visitors checked identification badges with reception staff. Nobody paid much attention to Amara until she quietly approached the reception counter. The young receptionist looked up with a welcoming smile. "Good morning. May I help you?" Amara returned the smile just as warmly. "Good morning. My name is Amara Brooks. I have business with the board of directors." The receptionist searched the digital visitor schedule, her confident expression slowly becoming uncertain. She searched once more before looking back apologetically. "I am sorry, ma'am. I do not see your name on today's visitor list." Amara did not appear surprised. "That is perfectly all right. They are expecting me even if the schedule is not." The receptionist hesitated. "Would you happen to have an appointment confirmation?" Amara gently placed one hand on the old leather briefcase. "No, I was invited directly, unsure how to proceed." The receptionist politely contacted an executive assistant upstairs. The call lasted less than 30 seconds before ending without clear instructions. "I have been told that everyone is preparing for the board meeting," she explained. "They asked if you would be willing to wait a few minutes." "Of course," Amara answered. She stepped away from the desk and quietly stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the busy Chicago streets below. She never checked her watch. She never complained. She simply waited with the same patience that had guided her through decades of difficult decisions. Several employees passed by, some offering polite smiles while others barely noticed her presence. A few curious glances lingered on the worn leather briefcase that seemed strangely out of place among expensive designer bags and polished executive cases. Moments later, the revolving doors opened again. Daniel Whitmore entered the lobby, surrounded by senior executives, discussing presentation materials for the morning's board meeting. As he crossed the marble floor, his attention briefly settled on the unfamiliar woman waiting alone near the reception area. His pace slowed almost imperceptibly. Without knowing her name, her purpose, or the invitation waiting several floors above, he had already begun reaching a conclusion that would quietly change the course of everyone else's day. Daniel Whitmore rarely questioned his own instincts. At 48 years old, he had built a reputation throughout Chicago as a chief executive officer who made fast decisions and expected immediate results. Employees admired his confidence. Shareholders praised his relentless drive, and business magazines often described him as the leader who could recognize opportunity before anyone else entered the room. Over time, that reputation had quietly become something more dangerous. He had begun believing that his first impression was almost never wrong. As he crossed the polished marble lobby surrounded by senior executives, his attention returned once more to the black woman standing quietly beside the tall windows. She did not appear nervous. She was not looking around in confusion like a visitor entering an unfamiliar building. Instead, she observed the lobby with calm curiosity, almost as though she had seen countless places like it before. Daniel found that confidence strangely unsettling. He slowed his pace and looked toward his executive assistant. "Who is she?" he asked. The assistant checked her tablet. "Her name is Amara Brooks. Reception says she claims to have business with the board of directors." Daniel frowned slightly. "Claims?" The assistant nodded. "She is not listed on today's visitor schedule." Daniel glanced toward the elevators where members of the board were preparing for the company's most important quarterly meeting of the year. Representatives from major investment firms were expected to arrive within the hour. Every presentation had been rehearsed repeatedly, Every minute had been carefully scheduled. Unexpected visitors were exactly the kind of distraction he refused to tolerate. "Did anyone upstairs confirm her meeting?" he asked. "No," the assistant admitted. Reception could not reach anyone who recognized the appointment. Daniel folded his arms while quietly studying Amara from across the lobby. The worn leather briefcase in her hands caught his attention. It looked decades old, softened by years of careful use. Her clothing was neat but understated, lacking the designer labels and expensive accessories commonly seen among corporate executives entering the building every morning. Without realizing it, Daniel's mind began filling the gaps with assumptions rather than facts. He convinced himself that if someone truly belonged in a board meeting involving hundreds of millions of dollars, they would surely arrive looking more like the investors he met every week. Nearby, two junior employees noticed their chief executive officer watching the woman and instinctively turned their own attention toward her. Within moments, quiet whispers began spreading through the lobby. "Who is she?" one employee asked. "Maybe she is lost," another suggested. A receptionist overheard the conversation and immediately felt uncomfortable. She remembered how politely Amara had spoken only minutes earlier. Nothing about her behavior had seemed suspicious. In fact, she had been one of the most patient visitors the receptionist had encountered all week. Daniel finally walked toward the reception desk. "Has she caused any problems?" he asked. "No, sir," the receptionist answered honestly. "She has been extremely respectful." "Has she provided identification for today's meeting?" "No, sir." Daniel nodded once, believing the matter had become perfectly clear. Then she should not remain here. Across the lobby, Amara noticed the conversation without trying to overhear it. She understood the subtle language of glances, lowered voices, and cautious expressions. She had experienced moments like this before in places where appearance often spoke louder than introductions. Yet there was no frustration in her face. She simply rested one hand lightly against the old leather briefcase and waited. Inside that weathered case rested only a notebook, a fountain pen, and a slim folder containing a single invitation letter she had never felt the need to display. She believed respect should not require proof before it was offered. As the quiet tension continued building beneath the crystal chandelier, one executive elevator several floors above opened unexpectedly. A member of the board glanced toward the live security monitor in the hallway, froze in place, and stared at the familiar woman standing alone in the lobby below. The silence inside the lobby grew heavier with every passing second. Employees who had been rushing toward morning meetings now slowed their pace almost without realizing it, stealing quick glances toward the woman standing beside the windows and the chief executive officer walking steadily in her direction. The polished marble floor reflected the bright morning light pouring through the glass walls, while the soft music that usually filled the building seemed almost invisible beneath the growing tension. Daniel Whitmore stopped several feet in front of Amara Brooks, maintaining the confident posture that had earned him years of admiration in corporate boardrooms. "Good morning," he said politely, although his tone carried more authority than warmth. "I understand you believe you have business with our board of directors." Amara met his eyes with calm respect. "Good morning. Yes, I do." Daniel nodded once. "Unfortunately, there is no record of your appointment." "That does not surprise me," she answered gently. "Some meetings are arranged differently." Daniel studied her expression, expecting uncertainty or embarrassment, but found neither. She stood with relaxed shoulders, both hands resting lightly on the worn leather briefcase, her breathing slow and steady as though nothing around her demanded urgency. To Daniel, that quiet confidence felt strangely out of place. "This building operates on scheduled access," he explained. "Everyone meeting with our board is registered in advance." Amara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she simply replied, "I understand your procedures." Daniel waited for additional explanation that never came. "Then I am sure you also understand why I cannot allow unauthorized visitors to remain in the lobby before an important board meeting." She offered another small smile. "I understand why you believe that." Nearby, one of the security officers shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the conversation had become less about building policy and more about assumptions neither person was openly discussing. The young receptionist lowered her eyes toward her keyboard, wishing someone upstairs would answer the unanswered questions before the situation became more difficult. Daniel glanced briefly toward his assistant before returning his attention to Amara. "May I ask who invited you?" "Someone who expected me this morning," she answered. "Can you provide a name?" She remained silent for only a moment. "I could." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "But you are choosing not to. I believe the invitation should speak for itself when the right people arrive." Daniel exhaled quietly. To him, the answer sounded unnecessarily mysterious. He had spent years negotiating with investors, attorneys, regulators, and competitors. He believed that honest business conversations required direct answers, and every response Amara offered seemed to leave another question waiting behind it. Around them, more employees began quietly gathering near the elevators under the polite excuse of waiting for the next car. Even the coffee bar had become unusually quiet as conversations faded into whispers. No one wanted to appear curious, yet almost everyone was watching. Daniel finally looked toward the two security officers. "Please escort the guest outside while we verify her information." Neither officer moved immediately. The older of the two hesitated before speaking. "Sir, she has remained completely cooperative." Daniel answered without raising his voice. "I appreciate that. Please assist her outside until this has been resolved." The officer nodded respectfully and stepped toward Amara. "Ma'am, would you mind waiting just outside the entrance?" Amara looked at him with the same kindness she had shown everyone since entering the building. "I do not blame you for doing your job," she said softly, "but I believe I should remain exactly where I was asked to be." Before the officer could respond, a sharp electronic chime echoed from the executive elevator bank above. At nearly the same instant, hurried footsteps thundered through the executive corridor several floors overhead, followed by the unmistakable sound of multiple voices calling urgently for someone to stop the chief executive officer before another word was spoken. The electronic chime echoed once more through the executive elevator shaft, but this time it was followed by something no one in the lobby had expected. The sound of hurried footsteps grew louder with every passing second, accompanied by urgent voices speaking over one another somewhere above the polished marble floor. Employees near the reception desk exchanged puzzled looks while the two security officers instinctively paused where they stood. Daniel Whitmore glanced toward the executive elevator doors with mild irritation, assuming another last-minute problem had interrupted the morning board meeting. "Stay focused," he quietly told his assistant. "We will finish this first." His attention returned to Amara Brooks, who remained exactly where she had been standing since entering the building. She neither looked toward the elevators nor reacted to the growing commotion upstairs. Instead, she calmly adjusted the handle of her weathered leather briefcase before looking through the glass wall toward the Chicago skyline, bathed in warm morning light. The older security officer spoke gently. "Ma'am, I truly do not wish to inconvenience you." Amara answered with the same quiet kindness that had defined every word she had spoken since arriving. "I know that. You are trying to do your job, and I respect that." The officer offered a grateful nod. "Thank you for understanding." Nearby, the young receptionist continued refreshing the visitor system on her computer, hoping some forgotten appointment would suddenly appear. Nothing changed. Every search returned the same result. No scheduled visitor named Amara Brooks. She frowned slightly before checking another internal directory, then another, but every screen remained frustratingly blank. Daniel noticed her growing concern. "Anything?" he asked. She slowly shook her head. "No, sir." Daniel folded his arms with renewed confidence. "That settles it." Just as he prepared to speak again, the private elevator doors at the far end of the lobby slid open with a soft mechanical sound. Everyone turned instinctively toward the polished stainless steel doors. Instead of opening to reveal a calm group of executives preparing for another routine meeting, several members of the board of directors stepped out almost at once. Their composed professional appearance contrasted sharply with the urgency in their movements. One board member looked across the lobby before his eyes immediately found the woman standing quietly beside the windows. His expression changed in an instant. Without acknowledging anyone else, he hurried forward with surprising speed. Another board member followed close behind, clutching a tablet against his chest while speaking urgently into a wireless headset. The atmosphere inside the lobby shifted so suddenly that conversations stopped altogether. Even the background music seemed to disappear beneath the silence. Daniel took a single step toward the approaching directors, clearly confused by their unusual behavior. "Is something wrong?" he asked. None of them answered immediately. Their attention remained fixed entirely on Amara, the chairman's executive assistant, normally calm under every circumstance, walked rapidly from the elevator with visible concern. She looked first at Amara, then at Daniel, then toward the two security officers standing awkwardly between them. Her face lost its color. "Please tell me she has not left," she whispered almost to herself. Daniel frowned. "Who?" Before anyone could answer, the chairman himself emerged from the elevator. His normally measured pace had become an unmistakable hurry. The moment he saw Amara still standing peacefully beside the windows, he released a slow breath of visible relief. Without saying a word to Daniel, he walked directly across the marble floor toward her. Employees throughout the lobby instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path that had not existed only moments earlier. Daniel watched in complete silence as the most powerful people inside the company ignored every other concern in the building and moved toward the woman he had believed did not belong there, while a quiet feeling he had not experienced in years slowly settled into his thoughts. For the very first time that morning, he began to wonder whether he had reached his conclusion far too quickly. The chairman crossed the marble lobby without slowing his pace, his polished dress shoes echoing sharply beneath the towering glass ceiling as every employee instinctively stepped aside to clear his path. The room had become so quiet that even the gentle sound of the lobby fountain seemed unusually loud. Daniel Whitmore stood motionless, watching the scene unfold with growing uncertainty. He had never seen the chairman interrupt a board meeting for anything less than a corporate emergency. Yet the expression on the older man's face carried something entirely different. It was not fear. It was urgency mixed with genuine concern. When he finally reached Amara Brooks, he did something that stunned everyone standing nearby. Instead of questioning her presence, he smiled warmly and extended both hands. "Ms. Brooks," he said with unmistakable respect, "I owe you my sincerest apology. We did not realize you had already arrived." Amara returned the smile with the same calm grace she had shown throughout the morning. "Good morning, William," she answered softly. "There is no need to apologize. Everyone has been doing what they believed was right." The chairman lowered his head slightly before replying. "Even so, you should never have been left waiting." Daniel stared silently as the conversation continued. He knew William Carter better than almost anyone inside the company. The chairman was respected throughout the financial world for his measured judgment and careful professionalism. Daniel had never once seen him greet anyone with such immediate warmth, let alone address a visitor with obvious personal respect. Several board members gathered around them, each greeting Amara with quiet familiarity. One director smiled. "It has been far too long." Another added, "We have been looking forward to seeing you again." Their voices carried genuine appreciation rather than formal courtesy, as though they were welcoming an old friend instead of an important guest. Around the lobby, employees exchanged bewildered glances. The receptionist looked from the visitor log to Amara and back again, unable to understand how someone unknown to the scheduling system could be greeted by the board of directors as though she belonged at the center of the company's future. Daniel finally stepped forward. "Chairman Carter," he said carefully, "perhaps someone could explain what is happening." William slowly turned toward him. The warmth in his expression remained, but his eyes revealed quiet disappointment. "Daniel," he replied, "I was about to ask you exactly the same question." The chief executive officer frowned slightly. She arrived without an appointment. Reception could not verify her meeting. William looked toward the receptionist before answering gently. "That is because there was never supposed to be a public appointment." He paused for a brief moment, allowing the silence to settle across the lobby. Certain guests are invited directly by the board. Daniel felt the certainty he had carried all morning begin to weaken. "I was never informed." "No," William answered honestly. "You were not." One board member held up a slim digital tablet displaying the confidential agenda for that morning's meeting. Near the top of the schedule appeared a single line marked confidential, visible only to board members. Daniel had never seen that version of the agenda before. Another director looked toward Amara with a grateful smile. "Thank you for accepting our invitation despite your busy schedule." Amara nodded politely. "I promised I would come, so I came." Her answer was simple, almost understated. Yet every member of the board appeared to understand its significance. The older security officer quietly stepped backward, relief washing across his face. The young receptionist released a slow breath she had not realized she had been holding. Daniel remained standing beneath the crystal chandelier, surrounded by executives who suddenly seemed to know far more than he did about the woman he had tried to remove from the building. As he looked once more at the weathered leather briefcase resting calmly in Amara's hands, he realized that the most valuable person expected inside Whitmore Global Holdings that morning had never needed an expensive appearance to carry extraordinary influence. And somewhere deep inside the executive conference room above them, a confidential presentation waiting on the main screen was only moments away from revealing exactly why every member of the board had rushed downstairs the instant they recognized her face. William Carter slowly turned toward the executives gathered behind him before looking back at Amara Brooks with unmistakable respect. "Would you please come upstairs?" he asked warmly. "Everyone has been waiting to welcome you." Amara nodded with her familiar calm smile. Of course. Before taking a single step toward the elevators, she glanced quietly toward the two security officers. "Thank you both for treating me with kindness," she said. The older officer looked almost embarrassed. "Ma'am, we were only trying to follow instructions." Amara answered gently. "And you did so with respect. That always matters." The simple exchange left the younger officer unexpectedly emotional. In nearly 15 years working building security, he had encountered countless frustrated visitors, but never someone who thanked him after being asked to leave. Nearby, the young receptionist lowered her eyes for a moment before speaking softly. "Miss Brooks, I am very sorry if I handled anything incorrectly." Amara offered another reassuring smile. "You welcomed me with courtesy from the moment I arrived. There is nothing for you to apologize for." The receptionist released a quiet breath of relief, realizing the woman standing before her possessed a level of grace that no professional training manual could ever teach. Daniel Whitmore remained completely silent as he watched every interaction unfold. The atmosphere around Amara seemed unlike anything he had experienced inside the building. People did not simply respect her because of authority. They respected her because she naturally extended respect to everyone around her regardless of position. That realization unsettled him far more than any business negotiation ever had. As the group approached the executive elevators, one of the board members touched the secure access panel, allowing the private doors to open immediately. Daniel instinctively moved to follow them, but William raised one hand politely. "Daniel, please join us," he said. "There are several things you need to hear." The chief executive officer nodded quietly and entered the elevator behind the others. The ride upward lasted less than a minute, yet the silence inside the polished stainless steel cabin felt unusually long. Reflections shimmered across the mirrored walls as the city skyline slowly disappeared below them. Amara stood comfortably beside the handrail, her weathered leather briefcase resting at her side. She appeared no different from the woman who had quietly waited in the lobby only minutes earlier, yet everyone around her now treated her with unmistakable admiration. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, the conference room beyond was already prepared. A polished walnut table stretched across the room beneath floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Presentation screens displayed financial reports while neatly arranged folders rested at every seat. Several remaining board members immediately stood as Amara entered, greeting her with warm smiles and sincere handshakes. Daniel paused near the entrance, watching carefully as one director gently pulled out the chair positioned beside William Carter at the head of the table. It was not merely a reserved seat. It was one of the most respected positions in the room. William waited until everyone had taken their places before speaking. "Before we begin today's agenda," he said, "there is one introduction that should have happened long before this morning." He looked toward Amara with quiet gratitude. Many people know the success of this company. Very few know who believed in it before success ever existed. Daniel slowly looked up from the confidential agenda resting before him. For the first time that morning, he noticed a sealed folder placed directly in front of Amara's seat bearing a gold-embossed label that read Confidential Investor Review. His heartbeat slowed as questions crowded his thoughts. Every assumption he had confidently made since entering the lobby was beginning to collapse, and he realized the meeting he believed he controlled had never truly belonged to him at all. William Carter remained standing for a moment, allowing the quiet inside the executive conference room to settle naturally before continuing. Morning sunlight stretched across the polished walnut table, reflecting softly against crystal water glasses and neatly arranged presentation folders. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline shimmered beneath a clear blue sky, while inside the room every eye remained fixed on Amara Brooks. She sat comfortably beside the chairman with the same quiet composure she had displayed since entering the building, her weathered leather briefcase resting beside her chair, untouched. William folded his hands before speaking again. 8 years ago, this company was less than 3 months away from shutting its doors. Most investment firms had already walked away. Our credit lines were disappearing. Vendors were preparing to terminate contracts, and many of us around this table wondered whether we would have jobs by the end of the year. Several board members lowered their eyes, remembering a period few people outside the company had ever known. Daniel Whitmore listened carefully. Although he had joined the company years after that crisis, he had studied the financial history many times. Every report described an anonymous private investor whose capital had unexpectedly stabilized the company, allowing it to survive long enough to develop the technology that later transformed the business. The investor had always remained confidential under a long-standing agreement with the board. William slowly turned toward Amara. The person who believed in us when almost nobody else did is sitting here today. Silence filled the room. Daniel instinctively looked toward Amara, waiting for someone to explain what could not possibly fit the assumptions he had carried all morning. One board member opened the confidential folder before Amara and gently rotated it toward Daniel. Inside were copies of investment agreements, historical financial statements, and a letter dated 8 years earlier bearing the signature of Amara Brooks. Daniel read only the first page before stopping. The numbers alone forced him to read them again. The original investment had quietly grown over nearly a decade into an ownership position valued at more than $340 million. William spoke calmly. Ms. Brooks never asked for public recognition. She requested no special treatment, no public announcement, and no seat in executive management. She simply believed that if good people received enough time and support, they could build something extraordinary. Another director smiled warmly. Several investment firms laughed at the proposal she accepted without hesitation. A second board member added, many people believed she had made the worst financial decision of her career. Instead, it became one of the most remarkable long-term investments our industry has ever witnessed. Daniel slowly looked up from the documents. His thoughts returned to the marble lobby below, to the worn leather briefcase, to the unanswered questions, and to every conclusion he had reached before asking even a single meaningful question. The confidence that usually guided every board meeting suddenly felt painfully incomplete. Amara noticed his expression but said nothing. She simply listened while the board continued recounting the company's earliest struggles. William smiled gently. Many people believe success begins when the headlines appear. Ms. Brooks understood that real success begins much earlier, when nobody is watching. Amara finally spoke, her voice quiet enough that everyone naturally leaned forward to hear. I invested in people before I invested in numbers. The room remained silent. There was nothing dramatic about the sentence, yet it seemed to carry more weight than every financial projection displayed across the presentation screens. Daniel looked at the woman he had nearly removed from the building only minutes earlier and quietly realized that the person he had judged by appearance alone had helped create the very company he now believed he was leading, while the greatest lesson waiting inside the boardroom had never been about money at all. No one spoke for several long seconds after Amara Brooks finished her sentence. The presentation screens continued cycling through financial charts, but no one looked at them anymore. Morning sunlight rested quietly across the conference table, illuminating the confidential documents that had transformed the atmosphere inside the room. Daniel Whitmore remained seated, his hands folded together as he stared at the investment agreement lying before him. Throughout his career, he had learned to evaluate companies within minutes by studying numbers, projections, and executive summaries. Yet nothing in those reports had prepared him for the realization that the woman he had judged before asking a single meaningful question had shaped the future of the company long before he ever accepted the position of chief executive officer. William Carter gently closed the presentation folder. There is another reason we invited Ms. Brooks here today, he said. Her original investment agreement includes an annual private review with the board. She has honored that commitment every single year without requesting publicity, recognition, or influence beyond what was promised. One director smiled quietly. She has attended nearly every review carrying that same briefcase. Another nodded. Some years she arrived after visiting schools she supports. Other years, she came directly from community development meetings. She has always preferred to spend her time building opportunities rather than collecting attention. Daniel slowly looked toward the weathered brown leather briefcase resting beside Amara's chair. Only minutes earlier, he had unconsciously viewed it as another reason to question whether she belonged inside the building. Now he understood that it represented something entirely different. It reflected consistency, humility, and a life that did not depend upon appearances to communicate value. Amara noticed him looking at the briefcase and smiled softly. It still works, she said with gentle humor. A few quiet laughs moved around the table, easing the tension without removing its meaning. Daniel managed a small smile before lowering his eyes again. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Amara did not answer immediately. Instead, she poured herself a glass of water and waited until the room settled once more. Mr. Whitmore, she replied. There will be time for conversations later. Right now, your company has important business to discuss. Daniel looked surprised. After everything that happened downstairs? She nodded calmly. The company matters more than anyone's pride, including mine. Her answer seemed to affect every executive present. William leaned back thoughtfully before speaking. That perspective is one reason this partnership has lasted so many years. Another board member opened the strategic review prepared for the meeting. Ms. Brooks has reviewed every major expansion proposal we have considered during the last decade. She asks difficult questions, but she always begins with one concern. Daniel looked toward him. Which is? The director smiled. How will this decision improve the lives of the people who work here? Silence returned once again. Daniel glanced around the conference room, noticing the expressions on the faces of people he had worked beside for years. None of them appeared impressed by Amara because of the value of her investment alone. They admired the principles that guided every decision she made. The realization settled deeply inside him. He had spent the morning protecting the image of the company. She had spent years protecting its character. As the next presentation appeared on the large screen, Daniel quietly understood that the balance of influence inside the room had changed without a single vote being taken. The person with the greatest authority had never raised her voice, demanded special treatment, or reminded anyone of her wealth. She had simply remained true to herself, and in doing so had revealed that genuine leadership was measured less by the power to control a room than by the ability to quietly change the hearts of the people sitting inside it. The strategic presentation continued, but its carefully prepared slides no longer carried the same weight they had only minutes earlier. Revenue forecasts, acquisition models, and expansion plans remained displayed across the large screen, yet every discussion now seemed connected to a deeper question that had quietly entered the room. Morning light continued moving across the polished walnut table, creating gentle reflections in the crystal water glasses as the executives reviewed the next proposal. Daniel Whitmore listened more carefully than he had at any board meeting since becoming chief executive officer. For the first time in years, he realized he was not simply evaluating financial strategy. He was evaluating the values that would guide every decision after the numbers had been approved. William Carter looked toward Daniel before speaking in a measured voice. There is one matter we should address before we continue. The room became still again. Daniel nodded slowly. I agree. William folded his hands on the table. This morning was unfortunate, but it also revealed something important. Our company has invested heavily in technology, compliance, and operational excellence. We have not spent enough time asking whether our culture reflects the principles that allowed this company to survive in the first place. No one interrupted him. Several board members exchanged thoughtful glances as they considered his words. William continued, Policies matter. Security matters. Professional standards matter. But character matters just as much. Daniel lowered his eyes toward the confidential folder resting before him. Every sentence seemed directed at the company as a whole, yet he understood that he carried personal responsibility for what had happened downstairs. He took a slow breath before speaking. I made my decision based on appearances and incomplete information. His voice remained steady, but noticeably quieter than it had been in the lobby. I believed I was protecting the company. Instead, I failed to represent the company we claimed to be. Silence followed his admission. No one appeared interested in embarrassing him. There was no satisfaction in the room, only reflection. Amara Brooks remained composed, listening with the same patience she had shown since arriving that morning. She did not interrupt or attempt to soften his words. She simply allowed honesty to exist without judgment. William nodded respectfully. Leadership is not measured by never making mistakes. It is measured by recognizing them before they become habits. Another director added quietly, "Every person who enters this building forms an opinion about who we are long before they read our mission statement." The observation settled naturally around the table. Daniel looked through the conference room windows toward the city below. Hundreds of people were already moving through the streets, each carrying responsibilities invisible to those passing beside them. He thought about how easily a brief glance could become a permanent conclusion if curiosity disappeared. He turned toward Amara. "You said earlier that you invest in people before numbers." She nodded gently. "Yes," Daniel asked. "How do you know when someone deserves that trust?" A small smile appeared on her face. "I do not begin by asking what they own. I begin by noticing how they treat people who cannot offer them anything in return." Her answer filled the room with thoughtful silence. It was not directed toward Daniel alone. It was a principle broad enough to challenge everyone present. William quietly closed the financial presentation on the main screen. "I believe that lesson is more valuable than anything else on today's agenda." Around the table, no one disagreed. The morning meeting that had been scheduled to evaluate the future of a multi-billion-dollar company had unexpectedly become an examination of the people entrusted to lead it. And Daniel understood that the most important decision he would make that day would not appear in any quarterly report, but in the way he chose to respond after discovering the distance between authority and genuine character. The conference room remained quiet long after the discussion had moved beyond financial reports. No one appeared eager to return to spreadsheets or market forecasts because something far more meaningful had settled over the table. The morning had begun with expectations of another routine executive meeting, yet every person present now understood they had witnessed a moment that would shape the culture of the company long after quarterly numbers had been forgotten. Daniel Whitmore slowly closed the confidential folder in front of him and looked toward Amara Brooks. The confidence that had once defined every movement had been replaced by thoughtful humility. He no longer saw the woman who had quietly waited in the marble lobby. He saw someone who had believed in the company years before he had ever entered the building. Someone whose patience had quietly protected the future he now managed. He took a careful breath before speaking again. "Ms. Brooks, there is something I need to ask." She looked at him with calm attention. "Go ahead." Daniel hesitated for a brief moment, choosing his words with unusual care. "When security approached you downstairs, you could have told them exactly who you were. You could have shown these investment documents or called anyone in this room. Why did you remain silent?" Several board members looked toward Amara with quiet curiosity. Although they had known her for years, even they wanted to hear her answer. She rested one hand gently on the worn leather briefcase before replying. "Because the people downstairs were not making personal decisions. They were responding to the information they had been given." Daniel listened without interrupting. "If I had announced my position immediately," she continued, "the conversation would have become about my influence instead of our character. I wanted to understand how people inside this company treated someone they believed had nothing to offer them." Her words settled softly across the room. No accusation existed within them. There was only honesty. William Carter slowly nodded. "That has always been your way." Amara smiled gently. "Character is easiest to observe when no one believes they are being evaluated." Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment. He remembered every detail from the lobby. The receptionist had remained respectful despite her uncertainty. The older security officer had spoken with dignity while following instructions. Even the younger officer had apologized, although he had done nothing wrong. Then Daniel remembered his own certainty, the assumptions that had guided every decision before he had asked enough questions to understand the situation. He quietly realized that authority had made it easier for him to reach conclusions instead of seeking understanding. "You have every reason to lose confidence in me," he admitted. Amara slowly shook her head. No. Daniel looked surprised. No. She smiled kindly. One difficult morning does not define an entire person. What matters is what someone chooses after they recognize the truth. The room became silent once more. Her answer carried unexpected mercy. She had been given every opportunity to embarrass the chief executive officer in front of the board, yet she had chosen something entirely different. William looked toward Daniel. You asked earlier how trust is earned. You are hearing the answer now. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding that forgiveness required just as much strength as accountability. He looked through the conference room windows where sunlight reflected across the glass towers surrounding downtown Chicago. The city below continued moving without knowing anything about the conversation taking place high above its streets. Yet inside that room, one quiet decision had already changed the direction of a leader's heart. Daniel finally understood that genuine power was never demonstrated by proving another person wrong. It was revealed by giving someone the opportunity to become better after they had been wrong. And the woman he had almost asked to leave the building had chosen to invest in his future with the very same grace she had once invested in the future of the company itself. The meeting resumed, but the atmosphere inside the executive conference room had been permanently transformed. The financial projections remained on the presentation screen, yet every conversation now carried a deeper awareness of the values behind each decision. The executives discussed expansion plans, employee development programs, and long-term investments with unusual thoughtfulness, often pausing to consider how each proposal would affect the people whose names would never appear in shareholder reports. Daniel Whitmore contributed carefully, no longer rushing to speak first. Instead, he listened with a patience that surprised even those who had worked beside him for years. As the final presentation concluded, William Carter closed his notebook and looked around the table with quiet satisfaction. I believe we have accomplished more today than approving another business strategy, he said. Several board members nodded in agreement. One by one, folders were closed, laptops were put away, and the formal meeting gradually came to an end. Chairs slid softly across the polished floor as everyone prepared to leave. Daniel remained seated for a moment before slowly standing and walking around the table toward Amara Brooks. The room became naturally quiet again, not because anyone expected drama, but because everyone sensed that an important conversation was about to take place. Daniel stopped beside her chair and spoke with complete sincerity. Ms. Brooks, I owe you an apology that deserves to be spoken without excuses. Amara looked up at him with calm attention. I am listening. Daniel folded his hands in front of him. This morning I judged you before I knew you. I believed I was protecting the company, but I allowed assumptions to replace understanding. I treated your appearance as evidence instead of asking questions with respect. I cannot change what happened in the lobby, but I can accept responsibility for it. His words were simple and direct. No one in the room heard defensiveness or self-justification. There was only honesty. Amara stood and faced him with the same quiet grace that had guided every moment of the day. Thank you, she said softly. That apology carries weight because you did not protect your pride while giving it. Daniel nodded. I hope, in time, I can earn back your confidence. Amara smiled gently. Confidence is not returned with promises. It grows through consistent choices. She extended her hand. Daniel accepted it with genuine respect. Around the table, several board members exchanged quiet smiles, recognizing that the handshake represented far more than professional courtesy. It marked the beginning of a different kind of leadership. William Carter stepped forward. Daniel, I would like you to work with human resources and our leadership team to review how every visitor experiences this company from the moment they enter the front doors. Daniel answered immediately. I will begin today. William nodded. Not because policies failed. They largely worked as intended. We will do it because culture is built through ordinary moments that people remember for years. Daniel understood exactly what he meant. He thought about the receptionist who had remained courteous despite uncertainty, the security officers who had treated Amara with dignity while following instructions, and the countless visitors who would enter the building in the years ahead carrying stories no one could see. Before gathering her briefcase, Amara looked once around the conference room. A company becomes extraordinary when every person is treated with the same respect before their title is known. No one attempted to improve upon her words because nothing needed to be added. The morning that had begun with assumptions in a marble lobby had ended with something far more valuable than a successful board meeting. It had reminded every leader in the room that trust, respect, and humility were never secondary to success. They were the very foundation upon which lasting success was quietly built. The executive conference room gradually emptied as board members gathered their folders and exchanged quiet conversations before returning to the responsibilities waiting throughout the building. Morning sunlight now filled the room completely, washing the polished walnut table with a warm glow that felt different from the sharp brightness that had greeted everyone only a few hours earlier. The atmosphere had changed in a way that could not be measured by financial reports or meeting minutes. Something far more lasting had settled into the culture of the company. Amara Brooks picked up her weathered brown leather briefcase and thanked each board member individually before making her way toward the elevator. William Carter walked beside her until the doors opened. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "not only for believing in this company all those years ago, but for reminding us what kind of company we still have the opportunity to become." Amara smiled with quiet warmth. "Companies change because people choose to change. That choice belongs to all of you now." The elevator doors closed gently, carrying her toward the lobby where the morning had begun. When she stepped onto the marble floor a few moments later, the young receptionist immediately stood. "Ms. Brooks," she said softly, "I hope the meeting went well." Amara smiled. "It did. Thank you for welcoming me this morning." The receptionist returned the smile, feeling a quiet sense of pride that her kindness had mattered even when she had no idea who her visitor truly was. Near the entrance, the two security officers noticed Amara approaching and straightened instinctively. The older officer opened the front door with a respectful smile. "Have a wonderful day, ma'am." "You as well," Amara replied. "Please continue treating every visitor exactly the way you treated me." The younger officer looked puzzled for a moment. "Even if we do not know who they are?" Amara nodded gently. "Especially then." Both officers smiled as she stepped outside into the bright Chicago morning. Across the street, the sounds of traffic blended with the steady rhythm of the city beginning another ordinary business day. Amara walked toward the sidewalk without looking back, her pace unhurried, her briefcase swinging lightly beside her as though nothing remarkable had happened. Several floors above, Daniel Whitmore stood alone beside the conference room window, watching the streets below. After a long moment, he left the room and rode the elevator back to the lobby. The receptionist looked up with surprise as he approached her desk. "You handled a difficult situation with professionalism this morning," he told her. "Thank you." He then walked toward the security station and shook hands with both officers. "You followed instructions respectfully. I appreciate that." Finally, he stood quietly in the center of the marble lobby where the morning had first gone wrong. He looked around at the glass walls, the crystal chandelier, the polished floors, and the people moving through the building with lives and stories invisible to everyone around them. He understood that leadership did not begin in the boardroom. It began there, in the first greeting, the first assumption, the first opportunity to show another human being simple respect. Months later, visitors would notice small changes throughout Whitmore Global Holdings. Employees smiled more often. Leaders spent more time listening before speaking. New training emphasized dignity alongside professionalism. Most people never learned why those changes had begun. They only experienced the results. Amara never asked for recognition, and her name never appeared in the company's public announcements. She did not change the world that morning. She changed one heart, and that heart quietly helped change an entire company. Long after the financial reports had been archived and the meeting had faded into memory, one lesson remained stronger than every number ever printed on a balance sheet. Wealth could build a business, authority could manage it, but only genuine kindness could remind people what it truly meant to be human.